Recording
Hello.
in progress.
Hello and good evening, everybody. Welcome to the November 15th, 2002 meeting of the City of Petaluma Planning Commission. And also tonight, we are going to have the Historic and Cultural Preservation Committee with us too for a joint meeting. I'll now call the meeting to order. Evelyn, will you please take roll call?
Bauer.
Here.
Hooper.
Here.
Wisman.
Here.
McErling. Absent. Potter. Absent. Ragusan.
Here.
McDonald.
Here.
And we have a quorum of the Planning Commission. Reinhardt.
Here.
Van Omeren. Van Omeren. Oh.
Here.
Perlis.
Here.
Pitangaro. Absent. Whitley.
Here.
And we have 4 committee members for the HCPC.
Great. Thank you very much, Evelyn. Okay, we'll now move on to general public comment. General public comment is for items that are not on tonight's agenda. And I'll let our moderator, Eric Roberts, take it from here.
Great, thank you, Chair Potter. I see one hand raised with our attendees joining us tonight. Taryn Obaid, I've allowed you to speak. You will need to unmute.
Hi, thank you. Good evening, everybody. I wanted to comment tonight because I've watched recent months as multiple planning commission meetings have been canceled. And it occurs to me that because also a couple of months ago, it was passed that staff is now has the authority to approve all conditional use permits, and that's brand new authority that they have. They have the authority to decide whether they're going to just go ahead and approve things or whether they'll kick it over to the Planning Commission. So that made me wonder what's getting approved. I'd like to see, and I'm requesting formally, please, Planning Commissioners, for you to please consider a running list of all of the approvals that are being done ministerially, having to do with SPAR, having to do with minor conditional use permits and regular conditional use permits. Cell towers. Our ordinance does not call out that the Planning Commission or City Council needs to approve minor facilities or major facility conditional use permits. That's my read of it. And my concern is what the heck's going on that we might not know about unless we happen to live 100 feet of something. And we all know that electromagnetic fields travel more than 100 feet. So we did get a new permit software, and I thought it was supposed to be really easy to search and easy to pull up a report to see what's going on. But no, I can't figure it out. So can we please formally carve out some space and let the public know what's going on, because you guys aren't clearly, it appears you're not being brought into some of the recent decisions that have been going on. I'd also like to formally make 2 other requests. Planning Commissioners, can you please consider putting together a letter to send to City Council, encouraging them to change our ordinance so that we no longer allow wetland credit trading. No banking on that. It is the #1 thing we can do to meet our carbon goals, but we're acting like it's nothing. We're acting like switching from gas to electric stove is going to solve global warming. It is not. Can you please consider doing that? And then the other thing is we need to move like other cities have moved, like the city of Los Angeles decades ago, and stop letting developers do their own environmental impact reports. The more I read these things, and the more I read what other cities are doing to protect the public, not to protect developers. I can't believe that Forward Thinking Petaluma is still this backward. Please send that formal recommendation to council. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Taryn. And I'm not seeing any additional hands raised. I'll stop sharing my screen and pass it back to Chair Bauer.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Roberts. We'll close general public comment and move on to item number 4, which is committee comment. And we'll start with our council liaison, Councilmember Kevin McDonald.
Thank you very much. It's been busy since the last planning commission meeting in September. Council met on the September 19th, October 3rd, 10th, 17th, 24th, and November 7th. So quite a bit. The highlights include workshops on the Crosstown Connector, which prioritize Caulfield Connector over the Rainier Connector, and workshop on the future of the fairgrounds. Also, the council pushed the housing element forward on its way to review for Sacramento. And it approved additional dredging at the turning basin at the marina. And approved the paving on North McDowell Boulevard, which would be well received. And issued a letter of support for Danco's Meridian project at Corona to assist in that affordable housing financing effort. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Council Liaison McDonald. We'll now move on to our pedestrian and bicycle committee, and that would be Commissioner Hooper.
Last meeting, we had a lengthy discussion about an upcoming quick build project that's going to be happening on D Street. It's still being fully devised, but it looks like it could bring some desperately needed improvements to the area, especially around bicycle safety and better pedestrian flow. It's still going to take a bit of time to be finalized, but I'm looking forward to bringing more details to this body once it is.
All right, thanks very much, Vice Chair Hooper. Now move on to our Tree Advisory Committee report, and that's by Commissioner McErlane.
Yes, we met yesterday with Howard and Reinhardt and discussed, went through the tree list, existing tree list, and requested from John Shield, which he has sent us, a electronic version of the tree list that we can now edit and add or delete for your review. So we're in process.
Right. Thank you very much, Commissioner McErlane. At this time, I'd like to invite other planning commissioners and also members of HCPC committee members to comment or ask questions of those reports or make their own reports on issues that you have to report out on other things. Now I see Commissioner Rackison.
Just to follow up on Commissioner McErlane's comments about the tree committee, I encourage everyone to go to tomorrow's meeting of the tree committee. We're going to be discussing that topic as well as the tree ordinance. There's going to be a big discussion about the tree ordinance, what that's going to include. It's my understanding that city planning staff has already begun work on it, and we have, I think, a lot to bring to that discussion. So just encourage everyone to see that meeting tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Rackison. Any other comments, questions? I don't see any, so we'll go ahead and close that out. And then we'll go to item number 5, which is the planning manager's report. And that will be taken care of by our planning manager, Andrew Triple.
Great. Thank you, Chair Bauer, and good evening, members of the commission and the HCPC. We have just a brief report this evening. First of all, you've done a lot of work reviewing the 6 cycle housing element, and wanted to let you know that that has been submitted to HCD for review. They'll review that and return with comments that will then be reviewed by staff and then also shared with you in a study session. And that study session would be in early February. So I just wanted to update you on that and let you know that everything is moving forward as planned. So we're very excited about that. We do have a GPAC meeting this Thursday, and the focus of the discussion is going to be on natural resources strategies. So now that we have the draft housing element submitted to HCD, and we'll be working on review comments received and finalizing the housing element. You'll notice that the general plan update process will start turning to deeper dives on other components of the general plan. So you can look forward to a lot of exciting discussions coming up at GPAC, as well as other public opportunities. And then finally, based upon our current schedule, there would not be a meeting in December. And so this would be our last meeting for November. We are holding this special meeting of the Planning Commission this evening to combine both the first and second regular meetings. So this will be our only meeting in November, and we will not be holding a Planning Commission meeting in December. And then also just to remind you that City Hall will be closed next Wednesday through Friday for the Thanksgiving holiday. So with that, we look forward to this evening's meeting, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Planning Manager Triple. We'll now move on to new business, and that is the Hampton Inn Petaluma expansion, and also consideration for a zoning text amendment, which is citywide. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn it over to our Planning Manager, Andrew Triple, to explain the process tonight.
Great, thank you, Chair. We do have a presentation this evening that we'll be going through. It will be a bit lengthy, but it does cover all aspects of the project and all of the entitlements that will be reviewed this evening. We'll start out with a bit of instruction regarding purview for the individual review authorities. Then we'll go into the project background and then delve deeper into staff analysis of the individual entitlements. So Isabel, who's our historic preservation specialist, and I will be tag teaming that presentation with Isabel managing it and sharing it for your viewing enjoyment.
Great.
Great.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Planning Manager Triple. So I'll go ahead and formally open this item and also say that this item does require a public hearing. And I'll now ask commissioners and HCPC committee members to disclose any ex parte communications they might have for this item. I don't see any hand raised or indications of that, so we'll go ahead and move on. I'm going to ask the chair, I'm going to ask staff to give their presentation in a minute, but I just wanted to go over something first, just to clarify things. So the Planning Commissioner is here to review a citywide zoning text amendment to allow parking reductions. So that is our purview tonight. Our purview actually tonight does not deal with anything to do with the city of the hotel thing that's on the agenda tonight. So that is all taken care of by HCPC. So planning commissioners, please remember, when we listen to what's being said, and that when we talk about what we're reviewing and answer the questions and make our decisions, that it has to be dealt with on a citywide zoning text amendment. HCPC is here to talk about the actual Hotel Petaluma, and they'll deal with that stuff, but I just wanted to make sure that there's two different things going on here and to try to remember to keep focused on what is within our purview. So that being said, I will invite staff member to give their presentation.
Great, thank you, Chair. That was a great explanation. We really appreciate your support. So new business this evening is the Hampton Inn Petaluma expansion. It consists of 3 discretionary entitlements: the citywide zoning text amendment, and then project-specific historic site plan and architectural review, and a nomination for landmark tree designation. Next slide, please. So the project site is located at 409 Wilson Street. It's the former Soap Mill Hotel that through an adaptive reuse project several years ago was converted to the Hampton Inn Petaluma, and they are seeking an 18-room expansion. This is a view of the expansion to the rear. Next slide. So again, the entitlements are the amendment and HSPAR and the landmark tree designation. Next slide. So the presentation will follow relatively closely with the staff report. We'll first discuss background, including the joint hearings, the authority to hold a joint hearing, required findings. Then we'll go into the project description, and then a discussion and staff findings for each of the entitlements. Then we'll move on to public outreach and public comments for the entirety of the project, how the project aligns with city council goals, as well as climate action and sustainability impacts. Finally, the required environmental review that was conducted, and then our recommendations. Next slide, please. So the entitlements required a zoning text amendment to modify section 11.040 of the parking ordinance, specifically alternatives to on-site parking. The intent of the proposed amendment is to allow a reduction to the minimum parking requirements, subject to certain findings and a review authority approval, as well as some associated amendments in references to sections 11.030 and section 11.065. Then the project-specific entitlement includes historic site plan and architectural review for the proposed two-story 18-room rear addition to the existing Hampton Inn Petaluma Hotel. And then finally, the applicant property owner has requested a landmark tree designation for an existing approximately 65-foot tall Canary Island palm tree. Next slide. So the joint hearing this evening, the Planning Commission has purview over the citywide proposed zoning text amendment, and they would make required findings, including conformance with the general plan and also public convenience, necessity, and welfare. They should evaluate the proposed amendment for appropriateness and need. We are asking to consider the threshold for minor and major adjustments, as well as the review authorities for each level of adjustment, and then the findings that we are proposing to be made for the discretionary modification to parking. And then, of course, to consider public comments. Next slide. And then we have the second purview of the Historic and Cultural Preservation Committee. And their purview is project specific for HSPAR and landmark tree designation. And again, the standards for review are provided here. Isabel will go over those in greater detail. Also, she will review conditions of approval that are being proposed and then consider public comments as well. Next slide. And here I will turn it over to Isabel to provide the project description, and then we'll come back to the zoning text amendment. Thank you.
Good afternoon, PC and HCPC. In terms of the location of the project, it's located within the northeast of the city's downtown and is situated between Jefferson Street, Wilson, and Lakeville Street. It's also within the city's Washington Core sub-area, and it's a mixed-use zone. The site is zoned as a mixed-use 2, nearby industrial district, a civic facility, and residential area. The site also contains a bus stop facing Lakeville Street and is roughly 0.2 miles away from the Petaluma Smart Downtown Station. The site was previously had an adaptive reuse project, which converted the former silk mill into a rehabilitated hotel. In terms of the historic context, the silk mill was designed by San Francisco architect Charles I. Havens in 1892. Its earlier work included extensions and addition to the textile mill building, which was completed after the 1906 earthquake, and in 1922 by Petaluma architect Brainerd Jones. As noted by the historic structural report completed by the Preservation Architecture dated 2009, the textile mill building features and contains terminology related to industrial mills within the 20th century. It contains timber framing elements, double-layered flanking floors, brick construction, and segmented brick arches. As previously mentioned, the site is listed in the National Register of Historic Places and the California Register of Historic Resources. These are two images which highlight the silk mill before and after the wing addition. Here is a compilement of the silk mill addition through the years from 1910, 1926, and 1950, demonstrating the development within the site and its existing condition as a hotel. As previously mentioned, the existing Hampton Inn Hotel features 75 guest rooms, 3 paved parking areas, 2 wall-mounted signs, 1 freestanding sign, and an outdoor area. The silk mill went through adaptive reuse and rehabilitation between 2016 and 2018. The 2018 addition required modifications to the retention of the chimney stack, which resulted in a reduction in height. This is work that was done prior to the use of the hotel. In terms of the architectural style, it was originally developed as a late Victorian architectural industrial mill with features previously mentioned, including the timber framing, double layers, and brick construction. Here's an older image dated 1929 before its adaptation. The project's description in terms of the site plan, the area for the rear expansion is currently used as an outdoor amenity space, which features low vegetation and loose furniture seating. As you can see within the site plan, the rear addition encircles the Canary Palm Island and is in the rear of the property facing Wilson Street. Within the rear expansion is proposed as an independent building connected to the former engine room by an exterior landing. It is proposed at approximately a height of 34 feet with a building footprint of 4,300 square feet. Each floor plan supports 9 guest rooms and total 18 new guest rooms for the hotel use. The new building's configuration encircles and preserves the Canary Palm tree. Within this slide demonstrating the north and south elevation, there is a feature to support the outdoor courtyard demonstrating and preserving the Canary Palm tree. There's emphasis and use within the courtyard to elevate the location and visibility to the existing Canary Island palm tree. As well here within the east and west elevation demonstrates the use and location of placements of windows in comparison with the silk mill and its access through an existing staircase. This section indicates the proposed height and floor levels are to match the former silk mill and the former engine room in the floor level. The section drawing demonstrates the mechanical well as well located in the center of the roof with the pitch of the line. Here below, I'm highlighting the continuity and the datum that was taken into consideration for the design. In terms of the architectural detailing, the applicant and designer have emphasized colors that are appropriate to the site and the building, emphasizing existing colors and using wood-clad windows and a fog color, the storefront glazing with a light gray color. The use of standing seam wall system is applied to the roofing and the facade as the general envelope enclosure. The interior staircase is provided within the middle of the building and provides ample space of visibility towards the Canary Island tree. The lighting fixtures proposed are simple in terms of the existing features applying to the existing features on site. Within the courtyard, as demonstrated in their ground first floor plan, it's open to accessibility from the parking lot and provides ample space and visibility through the glass opening and access to the interior courtyard. As you can see here within the rendering, it shows a light paving and low vegetation and a light colored view through the glass vestibule. Here are a few images demonstrating the existing outdoor area and elements that are visible with the properties adjacent to the proposed expansion. One component with this project is the preservation of the Canary Island palm tree. Here are a few images from 1940 to 2021 demonstrating the location and preservation of an element that is part of the landscape. And I will turn this over to Andrew to speak in behalf of the zoning text amendment. We plan to further discuss the project between the zoning text amendment and the HBAR entitlement.
Great, thank you, Isabel. So the standards of review for the zoning text amendment, as I mentioned earlier, the regulation is provided or authority is provided in Chapter 25 amendments. It does state that an applicant, such as a property owner, can bring forward a zoning text or map amendment. A public hearing is required. The required findings that Planning Commission must make in order to recommend adoption of the proposed zoning text amendment to council include that the amendment is in conformance with the general plan and consistent with public necessity, convenience, and general welfare. If those findings are made, then the commission has the option of recommending adoption to council or modifying the amendment and recommending adoption or denying to proceed with a recommendation. Because this is brought forward by a property owner applicant, should Planning Commission choose to deny a recommendation, then the applicant would have the option of appealing the decision of Planning Commission to the City Council. Next slide, please. So the existing ordinance does, to some extent, well, let's start with what it does do with regard to parking, because it does very specific things with regard to parking. So the purpose, of course, is to reduce street congestion and traffic hazards and to ensure that the land uses provide safe, adequate, and attractively designed facilities for off-site parking and loading. The minimum parking requirements that are established by the code through table 11.1 are based upon a variety of factors and are really generated by the transportation industry. And these include the size and intensity of the proposed uses that the parking would be servicing, the building's gross floor area for certain types of land uses, number of dwelling units, of course, for residential land uses. If we're looking at restaurants or salons, it would consider the number of patron seats for a business. It also does consider parking for the employees that are anticipated for a particular land use, and then other primary factors that generate demand for parking. So in other words, when we have a minimum parking requirement that's established based upon a land use, that minimum parking requirement does take into a variety of factors and does make certain assumptions about the intensity of use and the nature of the use based upon that very broad category of land use. Next slide, please. So our current ordinance does provide alternatives to parking. Section 11.040 offers 3 alternatives. A business could provide off-site parking at an alternate location. It could use shared parking at the same or a different site, and it could take advantage of valet parking. What's interesting to note about these alternatives to on-site parking is that these alternatives don't allow for a reduction in the number of parking spaces based upon factors including the unique nature of the use, proximity to transit, or other factors. So we're still applying a minimum parking requirement to a proposed land use. Section 11.065 then does give certain powers to the zoning administrator or director to modify these requirements. A project could incorporate compact spaces, and in doing so be able to achieve the minimum required number of parking spaces on a site. Again, we're manipulating the design of the parking and not actually reducing the number of minimum required parking spaces. However, we do see in subsection B that when it comes to housing for elderly persons or retirement homes, then we do provide the zoning administrator or director with the discretion to reduce the minimum number of required parking spaces. Additionally, subsection C does allow for a 25% reduction when it's using a common or shared off-street parking facility within 300 feet of the proposed use, but a conditional use permit is required. Per section 11.05, the review authority for that conditional use permit would be the director, so it would be a minor level conditional use permit. Subsection B and subsection C do inform what we are proposing in the zoning text amendment. which would give us greater flexibility to more accurately establish the minimum parking requirement for proposed uses. Next slide, please. And so the proposed amendment does consider the threshold for the 25% parking reduction that was established in subsection C, pursuant to the discretion of the director. And then also it does observe that a discretionary approval is required. So we're proposing two levels of adjustment that could be made to the minimum parking requirement. The first level is a minor adjustment, which would be used when a request for parking reduction is 25% of the number of spaces or less. The review authority would be the director or the review authority for associated entitlements. So in the case of the project before us this evening, were the zoning text amendment to be adopted, and this project came forward, then it does come forward with the HSPAR entitlement required. The request for parking reduction is 19%, so it would fall under a minor adjustment, and the review authority for the HSPAR would have the authority to consider the request for parking reduction. However, then when we consider parking reductions of 25% or greater, then we do start to become more acutely aware of having to closely examine the nature of the land use and what are those unique characteristics that may lead to less demand for parking. In that case, then we're proposing that a conditional use permit with review by the Planning Commission would be required. And then that raises the bar. It still gives us the flexibility, but it does allow for heightened scrutiny of a proposed parking reduction. And in both cases, additional findings are required. Next slide, please. So what do the additional findings look like that may be made in addition to, say, the findings to approve HSPAR or the findings to approve a major conditional use permit? Well, the first is that the applicant for the project does have to submit either a parking demand analysis for a minor adjustment or a parking demand study for a major adjustment. A parking demand analysis is a lower threshold and it would be less costly for an applicant. But again, we're looking at a minor adjustment of less than 25%. Parking demand studies are typically prepared by a traffic engineer. There's certain methodologies that are required, and they would be required, the study would be required for a major adjustment. But in both cases, the goal of the analysis or study should be to demonstrate that the proposed use would generate parking demand different from that which is required by Table 11.1. And there may be factors that could modify that demand or reduce demand for parking. For instance, there could be adequate off-site parking available due to a less intense use of the proposed or existing land use, which would result in an underutilization of existing parking. Additionally, there may be locational factors that place the project in closer proximity to alternative transportation modes. Again, in the case of Hotel Petaluma, being located within a quarter mile of the SMART station, located on a Petaluma transit route, as well as being fully served by pedestrian and bicycle facilities. And then also, as we've seen emerge over the last several years, bike share, car share, Uber, Lyft, and so forth, but access to and the use of alternative transportation modes that may help people move around with less dependency on a single occupancy vehicle. Next slide. Then the second required finding that we're proposing is that the number of parking spaces that is approved would be sufficient for the safe, convenient, and efficient operation of the use. So tying back to the purpose of the parking ordinance in ensuring that off-site parking is provided for reasons of safety, for reasons of convenience, and to reduce traffic congestion. And then third, it would consider the overall project characteristics. This is a more broad finding, including location, access to alternative transportation modes, incorporation of alternative transportation programs, and how those factors then support reduced on-site parking, as well as associated city goals in the areas of climate action, enhanced connectivity, economic viability, and community character. Next slide. The associated references would be an update to section 11.030 to refer to modifications provided by section 11.040, and then to section 11.065 to, should this zoning text amendment be adopted, which would provide for the minor and major adjustment options, to then incorporate that into the tools to reduce parking and to ensure that the review authority is appropriate based upon the proposed text amendment, rather than that section 11.065, which provides tools only to the director. Next slide. So the findings for general plan conformance, we reviewed the goals and policies of the general plan. In terms of land use policies that meet the long-term needs of our community, we find that the proposed amendment would respond to several goals and policies. I selected just the top three here. It would encourage flexibility in building form and allow for innovation and allow for development to change over time. It would allow for land use intensification at strategic locations that have been identified by the general plan. And then it would also encourage applicants to engage in innovative site and building designs to address parking solutions. It would also protect and enhance the city's identity and support increased connectivity by supporting rehabilitation and development of buildings, providing for greater diversity and intensity of activities at infill location sites. Specifically, it would encourage development patterns that provide an urban edge along East Washington Street. And it would also support synergistic and compatible uses. Next slide. Then those policies that it would support in terms of improving air quality and addressing transportation needs by disincentivizing parking for single occupancy vehicles, we can reduce vehicle-related air pollution. It would support ride sharing and car sharing programs as alternative transportation modes. And then it could also support efforts for transit-oriented development, particularly around the depot and surrounding streets. And then finally, it would support economic vitality and opportunity. It allows us to retain and attract those basic economic activities that can encourage economic development that would result in job opportunities. And then it would continue to support and expand downtown as our key hub for commercial opportunities. Next slide. And then the findings consistent with public necessity, convenience, and general welfare, because it would provide greater flexibility for the city's review authorities to consider parking adjustments. We would find that it would support the public necessity, convenience, and health by reducing vehicle-related air pollution, supporting and increasing utilization of alternate transportation modes, and then generally reducing auto-dependent design throughout development in our community. Next slide. Finally, the proposed zoning text amendment was reviewed, consistent with the California Environmental Quality Act. And we have determined that the exemption section 15061 would apply in that the proposed amendment only modifies the parking requirement for allowed land use, and CEQA does not any longer consider parking as an environmental impact. And then second, that any application of the ordinance on future projects would require their own analysis under CEQA, because all adjustments would be discretionary in nature. And so there would be discretionary review that would trigger CEQA. Next slide, please. And so the staff recommendation to Planning Commission is to approve a resolution recommending to City Council adoption of the zoning text amendment to modify section 11.040 to allow a reduction to the minimum parking requirements contained in table 11.1 for all land uses through proposed minor or major adjustment processes and subject to certain findings and review authority approval. The proposed amendments do include the amendments to associated references in sections 11.030 and 11.065. Next slide. And so with that, then I'll turn it back over to Isabel, who will provide the staff analysis for historic site plan and architectural review. Included in that process, she will go through specifically applying the proposed zoning text amendment to this project in a project-specific example.
Thank you, Andrew. Since this project involves multiple entitlements, the presentation has been split up between the zoning text amendment and now speaking on behalf for the historic site plan and architectural review. Following our staff analysis, our standards of review for the HSPAR included the review of the IZO through Chapter 15, bringing the project in front of the HCPC for meeting the standards and following review as well through discretionary review. The project also supports Chapter 17 for tree preservation. The design demonstrates the desire to preserve the tree at its greatest extent by also requesting a tree designation nomination. This request preserves the tree within the site, understanding that it is a specific feature for further preservation within the site. Within Chapter 18, the project would follow the public art requirement, providing a fee of 1% for the public art for a budget greater than $500,000. The project also follows Chapter 24, following the site plan and architectural review, that the architectural style is consistent with the overall character of the site and the neighborhood. It does not alter the sitting of the existing historic buildings. It remains as a hotel use. There is no additional use within the project that's being proposed. It continues the use of the hotel within the rear expansion. And it also contains a similar ridgeline, bulk and height and color, similar to the west adjacent building, also known as the former engine room. It does provide an appropriate character to the building and the site. And the project was also reviewed against the Secretary of the Interior standards. These are 10 standards that are applied to projects within rehabilitation. This is new construction, understanding that it does follow rehabilitation for a historic property. And I will briefly run through each item for our review. In terms of the use of the property, it does support a rehabilitated hotel use. In terms of the historic character, it does not alter the existing features within the silk mill, and it retains an outdoor amenity space with its new courtyard design. It avoids a false sense of historic development. It does not add on to the Victorian industrial building. It does provide a contemporary design showing a development of construction within the property. Within the preservation of historic features, the scope does not alter any physical features within the historic properties, and it does not impact the historic significance. Within the preservation of the distinctive features, the scope is limited within the existing outdoor area, and it does not propose work to the other buildings within the site. It also preserves the Canary Island palm tree as the site's distinctive feature. Continuing the review within the Secretary of Interior standards, it does not repair any features within the site, as it is an independent building for the rear expansion. It does not physically connect to the historic building other than by a second floor exterior landing. There are no proposed chemical or physical treatments to the historic building. There is no proposed work of undisturbed ground. The site has already gone through various alterations and additions, which has had the ground disturbed. There is a condition placed for a preventive measure to protect any unforeseen encounters as well. Because this is a new addition and it is new construction, the work is compatible in massing, size, and height and scale, and similar to the adjacent buildings on site. It also has compatible exterior materials. Staff does provide a recommendation for an appropriate perimeter for the mechanical well, and a height for the louvered parapet that we see on the north and south elevations. And I will go in further description within our conditions. These are items that could go through administrative review as well. And in terms of the removal in the near future, this is a new construction for long-term use as it extends the hotel capacity. And since it is independent building, it could be removed in the future without affecting the sites and the historic silk mill's essential form and integrity within the property and its environment. I'd like to also mention that the Secretary of Interior Standards has individual recommendations for new construction. The use of rehabilitation allows for the expansion and any addition to use new features that implements and demonstrates a development within the site and types of construction. Using the same forms and materials, the historic building in a manner does not duplicate or distinguish the addition with the original building, as we can see here on the rendering. The design of a new construction on a historic site that is compatible but differentiated through the historic building is a recommendation directly from the Secretary of Interior Standards. This provides a good example, developing the site without encroaching in its existing Victorian style architecture, but promoting a modern and contemporary use of materials with features, using features within the site as well. And I'd also like to extend the analysis onto our landmark tree designation. This is a purview of the Historic Culture and Preservation Committee. We have not come across it designating a landmark tree for some time, and I'd like to walk through the presentation of the standards of review to determine a landmark tree. Within the designation and the nomination, the tree must demonstrate 4 criteria that demonstrate an exceptional size, whether it is a distinctive form or an association to a historic person. This tree meets 3 of those 4 criteria, and briefly analyzing this particular tree within the site. The canary palm tree is over 65 feet tall with a diameter of over 30 inches, and from our historic archives demonstrates that it's over 80 years old. Within the visual impact, it is noted as one of the tallest palms locally seen, and it has been noted within our historic work as a contributing site feature. The tree is also associated with the site on the north edge of the property, with the silk mill site being listed on the National Register and the California Register. And for its environmental review for the HSPAR, it does have the exemption of 15331 as class 31 for historic resource restoration and rehabilitation, as the project is within a historic site. It also follows and is exempt through class 3, new construction or conversion of a small structure, since its footprint is under 10,000 square feet. And lastly, it falls for the CEQA exemption of an infill development within an urban site. For the CEQA exemption for the landmark tree designation, we have also noted that it falls through a variety of exemptions as noted here, within class 1 as an existing facility, within class 4 as a minor alteration to the land, class 7 for protection of natural resources, and class 8 as protection of the environment. And going on to our public comments. Within the project as a whole, staff has been involved with the applicant and their architect and property owner through various communications, and have worked to schedule a study session, which was held on July 14th. It was also noted and provided with on-site signage and there was positive comments from positive feedbacks from HCPC in terms of the design and any opportunities for further development. And there was a neighborhood outreach meeting held in November, was held remotely for properties and notified to properties within 1,000 feet. For this hearing, we also provided public hearing notice again through the Argus and mailed to property owners. And we have also received a public hearing comments early this afternoon in terms of the project as a whole. To summarize, that public comment was provided with various images and a description requesting additional parking for the hotel, as there would be an anticipation of additional parking coming for use of the managers, the staff, and the property as a whole. This particular public comment was also provided to each planning commission and HCPC as for their copy earlier today. Following the HSPAR and landmark tree designation, staff has provided recommendations for approval. For the HSPAR entitlement, very similar to other HSPAR applications, we do provide a condition for any chemical or physical treatments, always recommending for gentlest means as possible for the site and for historic features. We are also recommending a tree protection plan for the preservation of the Canary Island palm tree during all stages of construction. Following archaeological measures, we're placing a condition to protect and preserve any unforeseen encounters. Through the administrative review, we are proposing condition if there are any additional future lighting fixtures or minor landscape or hardscape, along with modifications to the mechanical well and metal louvered parapet. These are items that are very minor to the overall design that could be processed through administrative review. Along with our requirement for public art to be completed as a condition to equal 1% of the project budget. And as Andrew has discussed through the zoning text amendment, there is a condition for this project to move forward once the zoning text is adopted through City Council. That would meet the project's parking requirement. And it was provided in the agenda as attachment A and exhibit 1. And our last condition of approval for the HSPAR is that 19% reduction to meet the 95 spaces that would be reduced to 77 spaces within the project. As was previously mentioned, this zoning text amendment will have features that require findings as a parking demand analysis on evaluating that it is a sufficient and safe and convenient site, and that their overall project characteristics provide for alternative transportation modes. And to close the presentation, staff is recommending to HCPC that it is approved a resolution for the HSPAR to the proposed development of the 2-story 18 guest room for the rear addition of the hotel, subject to conditions as previously mentioned. And we recommend the approval and resolution of the landmark tree designation for the Canary Island palm tree. And this concludes our presentation. Our contact information is available here and as well through our emails and available for further questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isabel and Andrew, for those very thorough presentations. We'll now see if the applicant wants to give a presentation.
Hi, good evening. I just wanted, before I start, I just wanted to say thank you to Andrew and Isabel for that great presentation. And we've really enjoyed working closely with you guys on this project. And I think we're excited and proud of where it is today. So thank you.
Excuse me, Adriana and Perry, if you would just identify yourself for the record when you start your presentations. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm Adriana Cook from Eris Studio Architects, and the owner is Perry Patel with Radiate Properties. And I'm going to allow Perry to introduce himself.
Hi, good evening, members of the board. Thank you for your time and your consideration on this addition to this wonderful hotel, and more than a hotel, it's a beautiful building. Andrew and Isabel, I'm blown away. The work that you have put in on your presentation was phenomenal, and it was exceptionally thorough, and I commend you on a wonderful effort. I mean, I think you nailed it in terms of going through the level of detail in it, and I'm super excited that we had the opportunity to work with you on this. As Adriana mentioned, my name is Perry Patel. I'm the CEO of Radiate Properties. We rebranded our name. You may formerly remember us as BPR Properties, and we had a rebranding during COVID to our new name, Radiate. Our organization was founded in 1973 by my father. We are a local hospitality firm, owner and operator that's based out of Palo Alto. I would even add developer to that as well, as we acted as the GC on the project when we originally converted from the Silk Mill to a hotel. Our mission statement is passionately creating a sense of belonging, and I will go into it just a little bit deeper. And that's just not only for our guests, as we provide a home away from their home, but also for our team members that are working with us. And then lastly, also in the respective communities that we do business. We particularly enjoy finding projects like the Silk Mill, and that were once iconic buildings, and doing a rehabilitation and giving life back to them. As Isabel and Andrew had mentioned, we had fully restored the Silk Mill as a hotel. As a project that our firm has been working on for many years, started in 2015, and eventually the hotel opened in 2018. And then we actually had received a couple of accolades on our project. It was the Hilton Development of the Year Award in 2018. And then it was also noted by the North Bay Business Journal as a top real estate award in 2018 as well. I'm going to go back and let Adriana go through the project, but I'll be working alongside of her if there's any questions, or if I just add comments along with her. So thank you.
As mentioned previously, the existing hotel is 75 guest rooms. There are 14 double queen bedrooms, and a majority are single king bedrooms. The amenities offered are breakfast room, fitness center, a small business center, but there are no meeting spaces, and there's a demand for more guest rooms. The proposed addition is proposing 18 double queen bedrooms, and this would allow for more families to stay and increasing the total room count to 93 guest rooms. This is the current site, and here's an image of the proposed addition site. We had the HCPC study session back in July, and there were just a few items that we were asked to kind of look into that we took back with us and tried to reconfigure some things and really dive into their concerns. One of the things we were asked to look into was to better understand how guests arrive and travel to our hotel. With that, we did an in-depth parking study. This shows alternate modes of transportation, not only for guests, but employees. We're very, very close to the SMART station. There's also been a large increase in Uber and Lyft, ride sharing. And we've also added some additional measures to reduce auto trips, such as e-bike rentals on our property. And just to note, the 2021 occupancy rate is just below 72%, which is roughly the same. We're on track for that this year as well. Another thing we were asked to look into is to preserve the palm tree in its current place, and also preserving some outdoor space for guests. We were also asked to look into creating more harmony and balance between the new development and the existing historic building. So with that, I'm just going to kind of go over a few of our site constraints. So this is the area of the proposed addition. As you can see, the existing palm tree is located roughly in the center of that area. We also have an existing transformer for the hotel on the northern Wilson side. And then we have existing sidewalks and egress points for the existing hotel as well to consider. To tie into the existing hotel, as Isabel mentioned, on the second floor, the landing at that exterior stair will extend over to the addition second floor. So that connection is also very important. This was the first iteration of the site plan that we came up with and brought to HCPC. We had relocated the palm tree. We were able to get 20 guest rooms, but there was no outdoor space. With that in mind, our design goals were we want to allow more families to stay at the hotel. We want to preserve and highlight the view of the existing palm, complement the existing historic silk mill, and preserve some of the existing outdoor space for guests. We had a lot of different variations. You know, we tried this one, not enough guest rooms, looked into this and not enough double beds. Tried this version, things were a little too tight, or our egress stair went across our fire and life safety windows. We finally came to an option that I think achieved HCPC's concerns and overall created a better project. Here's our proposed site plan. We have glazing at all of our circulation points, which allows for a direct view to the palm off of Wilson. And it also, with saving the palm tree, we created this courtyard area, which also preserves outdoor space for guests to enjoy, gives a little bit of a buffer from the parking area. And here's that 3D rendering of the palm tree courtyard. Here's a view off of Wilson Street. And I think the inspiration for this glass tower, we kind of looked on site, and the water tower here has these tall, almost delicate members that we pulled from to inspire this piece. The proposed north elevation off of Wilson Street. As you can see, the full glass allows a view straight back to that palm. This is the existing stair landing that we've extended over. The proposed roof height matches the adjacent metal building and is shorter than the historic brick building. We've also, as Isabel mentioned, matched the windows, the height and rhythm of the existing building. However, instead of doing the 10 light window of the historic building, we've kept with the 2 light to distinguish from the historic to the new. The materials we're using are actually the existing standing seam that we have on the rest of the building. So as you can see, this is a standing seam roof on the brick portion. This is the standing seam that is on the metal portion, and we're proposing to use that on the roof as well as the vertical facade. And this corrugated metal is also vertical. And so what this does is it really ties into the existing building, but distinguishes its own character because it is a new portion, and we want to complement each other and not look as if we're trying to be historic. Here's a view from the corner of Jefferson and Wilson. And that is our presentation. We also have Mark Holbert, our historic architect, available for questions. Yeah, that concludes our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adriana and Perry. Great presentation. We'll now move on to the commissioner and committee member questions. First, I'll ask planning commissioners if they have any questions on the zoning text amendment. And after that, I'll turn it over to Chair Reinhardt. Chair Reinhardt can solicit feedback and questions from the HCPC members. So we'll start with Planning Commission then, and we'll start with Commissioner Roccason.
Thank you, Chair Bauer. One simple question to kick us off. Can you explain the difference between a parking demand analysis and a parking demand study? And just what's required on each?
Sure. So thanks for that question. I think the essential characteristic would be that a parking demand study would be prepared by a licensed traffic engineer. So whereas the parking demand analysis could be prepared by a civil engineer with a background in transportation or, a similar type of profession. We did want to, both of them would be required to address demand. So it's not a supply-oriented study, but a demand-oriented study. And it would need to respond to the findings that would be required to be made. So, for a traffic demand study, typically they're applying a specific methodology. They're looking at existing development surrounding area and such. I think that the level of detail that was provided in the parking demand study that was submitted probably best describes sort of the higher level study.
Okay, terrific. And then just so I understand, if we approve the zoning text amendment, does that mean this project is approved, or would it still have to, obviously, would this go before, and this is to explicate for myself and for the public, would this then have to go before council and then project meet required findings for minor adjustment? And I hope this also kind of speaks to the comments, the public comments received, just so we're clear about the process by which this would actually move forward.
Sure, great question, thank you. So the project is proposing a reduction, or well, the minimum parking requirement for the project as proposed would be 94 parking spaces. They're proposing on their site plan the existing 77 parking spaces that are currently part of the site. And that equates to a request for 19% reduction in parking. So with the way that the zoning text amendment is written, through a minor adjustment process, the review authority for existing discretionary entitlements could consider that 19%, that request for a 19% reduction in parking. So in this particular case, then HCPC would consider that request for reduction as part of the HSPAR review. We have written the conditions of approval. The first condition is that is reliant upon City Council adoption of the zoning text amendment to essentially create the policy to deliver the discretionary parking reduction. So Council would have to adopt a zoning text amendment. That, I believe, is in condition of approval number 20. And then in condition of approval number 21, then we've provided the findings to make then the parking reduction. So this evening, should Planning Commission vote to recommend adoption of the ordinance to City Council, and should HCPC approve HSPAR for the project, the zoning text amendment would still have to go to City Council for adoption. However, after that, though, it wouldn't have to come back to HCPC for review.
Understood. Okay, so that's a big one. So planning, we're just deciding on the zoning text amendment for this project. It's also being decided tonight. Okay, and then just regarding the rest of the city, are there any early results from the Nelson Nygaard study on existing street parking conditions in the city, or do we have any other metrics on the current supply of street parking or the condition of street parking in the city?
To my knowledge, we've not received that study yet. I think that it's due for completion, and the draft is due to us imminently, but we've not received it yet. The parking demand study that was submitted considered on-street parking within a two-block radius of the hotel. It counted the number of parking spaces available. Typically, you would use a measure of 19 to 20 feet of on-street parking of curb in order to designate a parking space. And then they also made additional observations across a period of time. And I believe determined that of all of the spaces available, I believe there's roughly a 70% vacancy rate in on-street parking. So, and I think that while we don't point directly to considering on-street parking as one of the findings, certainly a review authority could take that into account. And in this particular case, the parking demand study did deliver, I think, a fairly detailed analysis of on-street parking.
But then considering this from kind of that citywide perspective, we don't have that Nelson Nygaard study yet. So, okay, so ideally, and I know there are plans to potentially get more, do a lot more with adjusting parking minimums, maximums, things like that. So hopefully we'll be informed by that study at that point. And then kind of following up on that, does this, and this might be outside the scope of just this amendment, this is my last question, do we have any kind of feedback loop, like a measurement or management plan to check on cumulative impacts of major and minor adjustments? Collecting, again, this would play into information, broad information on parking supply, peak management, safety, maybe LOS or some other measure of congestion, more broadly to assess the impacts, the cumulative impacts of minor and major adjustments on different projects to then, and could that then play into decisions on future projects? To say we've made so many major adjustments in this area that we have negatively impacted street parking, something of that nature. Is there any kind of mechanism like that, or is that outside the scope of this amendment? Would that be some other action?
I think that's a great question. I think that would be through another action, because that would sort of be analyzing the impacts of creating that policy. So we would be looking at more of a longitudinal analysis. I think that the commission could, as part of a recommendation to adopt, could instruct staff to develop a process for monitoring and considering the impacts of future decisions. I see that Heather has raised her hand, so I'd also like to invite her to comment.
Good evening, Chair Bauer, Chair Reinhardt, Commission and Committee. I was just going to add that, part of our effort and what we see as next steps is doing a comprehensive update to our parking code. So that is something we talked to the City Council about. We got some really good feedback from the City Council, from the Planning Commission, from PBAC on kind of the scope of changes that they wanted us to explore. So that is happening in the background among a lot of other things that we're working on and priorities we are trying to move forward. So I would imagine, Commissioner Rakusin, that this actually, it's almost like a short-term measure in a way. This has come up. This project specifically needed some flexibility, and we don't have it in our code. So this was brought forward specifically, kind of brought up through this project, but when we were looking at it, we were looking for a way to amend the code to provide some flexibility on a project-by-project basis, because so often we don't have that flexibility and we're waiting for the comprehensive update. And so this kind of does that. Now, when we come back with a comprehensive update, will this section still be in it? Will it modify? Will, depending on what we bring forward and what the direction is. So I just kind of wanted to give a little scope with that this is not instead of that comprehensive update to the parking code, but it's kind of in the meantime.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate that depth from both your answers. And I did want to just advocate for some kind of feedback loop like that in this overall management, to where as we, whether it be this kind of Band-Aid zoning text amendment or the future kind of overhaul, if you will, to our parking code, that there is something in there for public peace of mind, especially for folks who worry about availability of on-street parking, things of that nature, that we have some kind of feedback loop to assess impacts of adjusting, and that we're kind of measuring as we go to adjust as needed, so we're not causing, impairment, congestion, undue reduction of availability of parking. So I just wanted to advocate for that. But those are my questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Commissioner Rakusin. Vice Chair Hooper?
Well, thank you. And that last bit actually saved me the first question I wanted to bring up. So thank you. One question I do have, and it looks like page 22 of the staff report kind of confirms this, but I just wanted to get it clarified explicitly. When we're looking at factors for minor or major adjustments, and one of the factors includes access to alternate transportation, when we're looking at something like this and the feedback or the report that comes back is that, or analysis that comes back is that there is easy access to public transit, there is easy access to the bus or SMART or what have you. I want to make sure that that access is being treated as equitable when it comes to looking at automotive needs. And I only bring that up because I've noticed there's a tendency to look at, well, is there Uber, is there rideshare? But when we're looking at projects like this, if there is good access to the bus or to public transportation, is it safe to say that that is enough to be able to, in the case of a minor adjustment, make the discretionary change, or in the case of a major adjustment, bring up or bring forward having a major adjustment based on that access? Because I think sometimes it's not exactly clear, and I just wanted to confirm that that is something that's explicitly possible.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair Hooper. I do think that the way that we have written it, we talk about or we point to access to alternative transportation modes, which would be that bus, would be the train. And of course, we can then start to think, well, is it a fixed route such as a train, or is it a route that, if it's bus only, if that's your only alternate transportation mode, that bus route could change. So I do think that that's a factor that both the parking demand analysis or parking study should point out and should consider to what extent can that alternate transportation mode be depended on based upon the type of it. And then we go on and talk about incorporation of those alternative transportation programs. So I think that because that finding C includes both of those, and the review authority would have the broad discretion to use its own judgment on to what extent it wants to rely on alternative transportation modes and or alternative transportation programs. Does that help?
That does, thank you.
Okay.
And then in terms of evaluating, fixed versus a potentially variable route, or looking at, access or demand times for the train, for example, what's the burden going to look like? What's the burden going to look like where it's a sufficient amount of potential access? And I ask that too, because this also goes back to Commissioner Rakusin's point. I hope I said that right. I apologize. But goes back to his point of wanting feedback mechanisms. I don't want to see this become something where it's in the IZ or it's in the zoning text amendment. It's there, but when things change and maybe they improve, we're not seeing that reflected in the policy. So I'm just curious if there's that kind of feedback there.
I'm could you repeat the first part of the question again?
No, that's fair. What I'm trying to get at is what's the burden going to look like, or the information going to look like that shows that a site really has enough access to, whether it's fixed or variable routes for alternative transit. That's all.
I think that we would look at, much of the state legislation that's been sort of directing either elimination or reduction to parking requirements has really looked at a maximum distance of 1/2 mile from transit. Now, some legislation points specifically to high quality transit, which is 15-minute headways, either bus or train. But we really don't see any state level legislation, which has in part guided us on as we drafted the ordinance, looking across, especially the legislation that's been adopted the last couple of years, and then looking at various jurisdictions within the Bay Area. I think that except for those jurisdictions that are eliminating minimum parking requirements, we do typically see that there is proximity to transit as a key factor. And I would, as a project planner, I would be looking at that. If somebody is pointing to, in this case, the SMART station, I would want them to be providing distance to the SMART station, and I would be looking at that as well. So I do think it's a big factor, and again, we can use discretion there.
Okay, understood. That's all for now.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, great, thanks very much, Vice Chair Hooper. Commissioner McErlean?
Yes, I have a question. Is there a landscape architect on this project?
Let's say, Adriana, did you have your landscape architect this evening?
We do not, but we do have a landscape architect.
Has he had any input to this project?
Yeah, I think so. They did the existing hotel, and currently, because we're keeping the palm tree and basically paving around it or having pavers to make that courtyard, there's not a whole lot of added landscape. It's more tying into what's there. But we do have a landscape architect on board.
My concern is with the
Commissioner McErlean, just make sure we're staying in our lane, okay?
Is it working now?
Yeah, no, just make sure we as planning commissioners are, commenting and asking questions about the citywide zoning text amendment and not the details of the actual project.
Well, when do we get to ask the questions of the detail?
That's not within our purview. That's HCPC's
If I
purview.
have an issue with administrative review of landscape, is that?
Right, that's not our purview, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. Is that all? Are those the questions you have, or do you have any on the zoning text amendment?
My concern is, how do you control the quality of what's going to be built? Isn't that the planning commission responsibility?
That's the HCPC's responsibility.
That's the what?
The HCPC's responsibility here.
Well, okay, my concern is that there's a lot of landscaping that's being removed as part of this project, and I don't see anything being replaced. So I don't know how we address that, but I certainly think it needs to be addressed.
Thank you. Do you have any comments on the ZTA? Or questions, I mean, at this point?
Well, I think the parking for this project, given the occupancy is 60-something%, makes a lot of sense. I think every project has its own personality that we have to deal with. So I agree with Commissioner Rakusin in terms of having an ongoing evaluation of how's it working or how does it need to adjust. So, but I support that. I'm a little bit concerned with the age of the palm tree and its viability, but that's, I don't know when we can discuss that.
Right, again, that's HCPC purview. Sorry. The way it is here. Is that all you have, Commissioner McErlean, for now?
That's all I have.
All right,
I'm not sure what I'm restricted to talking about, but
it's the zoning text amendment, the citywide. Thank you. Okay, Council Liaison McDonald.
Thank you. We've hit on a number of good things here. I appreciated getting answers to is this the city's broad trend on this matter? And do we anticipate this to be part of the general plan update, which I think that is the trend we're heading in, right? So in terms of specific questions, I'm wondering, say that a business that's open at night, can they share space with a business that's closed at night under current rules or even under the zoning text amendment?
Yes, I believe. Oops. I believe under the alternative. So under the current parking ordinance, they would still have to provide that minimum number of parking spaces, but they could use shared off-site parking within, I believe it's within 600 feet. And then that would look at using off times that parking would be shared. So that was a bit of the difference is under through the current parking ordinance, we can look at arrangements for alternate parking strategies, but it still doesn't get at reducing the number of parking spaces that would be required.
Right, and I really like reducing the minimum. I'm behind that, but if we allow that, there's plenty of off-street parking currently, on-street parking currently available, and that's the exemption we take, which is one of the exemptions, then we're not doing anything about climate. All of the other findings kind of fall by the wayside, I think. Do you see it that way?
I think that we specifically did not write to point to on-street parking, in part because on-street parking provides parking for a variety of land uses, and in this particular case, while we have industrial across Wilson Street, we do have residential across Jefferson, and we don't want to negatively impact on-street parking by allowing that to be a factor where say a business owner could say, well, I don't have the off-street parking, but nobody ever parks on the streets around me. And so we don't want to negatively impact other users of on-street parking. However, I think that to the extent that in this case, because on-street parking was analyzed in the parking demand study, a review authority could look across all of the factors and conclude that even if there was, say, a special event in town and the hotel did experience a higher than normal rate of occupancy, that the street network could provide overflow parking in those instances. So it would function as a relief valve rather than a guarantee.
Right, I see that this puts a tremendous burden on the minor applicant, anyways, less than 25 for staff decision on this, and that's a thing that worries me. It's not explicit that we don't allow that. On parking is one of the criteria, and it's not ranked differently. So I can see the applicant, requesting that, and certainly in compliment. And then, given that we were provided all data in the traffic study, it says there were 100% occupancy on weekends. And that would mean that they'd be 100% of 95 units on weekends in the future and, needing accommodation. I think that HCPC was on the mark about finding the origin of the trips. And I think certainly when someone is commuting to work, and I'm trying to figure out how the zoning tech would work broadly with other buildings, is if you were looking at employment, repetitive pattern transportation, certainly regional transit and mass transit would both reduce the parking ability and hit the climate goals. But when you're talking about weekend travelers, I worry about whether the climate goal, I don't think the climate goal is really being captured here, if you will. I think for this application, it's not the resultant. And for because of that, I worry about the discretionary level being put on staff and whether it's good to have staff having that. Yeah, I find the breakpoint minor and major at 25 seems too big. And, it seems like there's a lot of financial project costs to be gained or lost in this decision. And I hate putting staff into a position where they might be accused, like at the beginning of this session, of playing any sort of favor that didn't get publicly aired. So I would like to publicly air a major project, minor project at perhaps a lower level. And that leads me to a different question, which is, this is a remodel or expansion project, and it can be treated as one aggregate with the existing rather than treated as new and separate. I know we have other hotel applications, and I would suppose they would be treated as new and separate since they're not additions. Are we allowed, is there a code in place that allows an addition to avail itself of zoning text amendment? Parking reductions, just for an addition?
Well, I think if I understand your question, so we have an existing use and that existing use expands, then we would only look at the parking reduction on the expansion.
That is the question, but I'm asking, do we have the authority, does code let us assimilate or an addition to these kind of change it later, or is the first project standalone?
Oh, I see the question. So I think that in this case, we're looking at the overall land use. So in that sense, we're combining them together to say, what is the demand based upon the overall land use, and not really assigning that parking reduction to the proposed expansion or to the existing vested rights that were received for the existing project. So I see that Assistant Attorney Brady has his hand raised.
Thanks, Andrew. And I just wanted to address one question that Councilmember McDonald, or almost Mayor-elect McDonald, I should say, had about staff deciding these minor adjustments. So Andrew, let me know how, if I'm wrong here, but how I read the code amendment, it's the reviewing authority, which in case of its ministerial will be the director. But if they are seeking a minor adjustment up to the 25% as part of a HSPAR or any SPAR hearing, that it would be the Planning Commission or the HCPC that makes that decision as well.
Well, right. But however, they could also request a minor adjustment on an administrative SPAR application. And so for that application, the director is the review authority. So there are cases, and even with a minor CUP. So there are instances where the director would be the review authority for the discretionary entitlement.
Can we think of a case of that last couple of years?
I don't know, because we haven't had the tool for discretionary reduction. So typically, they've addressed it already and resolved the parking.
Right.
To meet the minimum requirement.
I was going to say the same thing. It's hard to think of an example recently because we haven't had the flexibility. So if somebody came in, we would just be like, sorry, you don't meet the code. We can't approve this. So I was trying to think of something that's come forward. I think the point that Dylan brought up is a good one. And it was one that I was thinking of too, that it goes with the discretion on the project overall. So it can be a minor adjustment and it still can be at Planning Commission. If it's a major SPAR with a minor adjustment, it could be at Planning Commission, or like in this case, historic SPAR with a minor adjustment. The discretion would be with the HCPC. So clarifying that. And then the other thing I just really want to clarify is even if a use permit or a site plan and architectural review is an administrative level, it is still noticed. It's not done in a vacuum. It's done, it's noticed, it's published in the paper, it is sent to neighbors, and all the same findings that the Planning Commission has to make for a major SPAR have to be made for a minor SPAR. All the same for a minor historic SPAR are the same as a major SPAR. So there's still great structure and process to the review of those.
Would all those minors still appear on the city's website for project listings?
We do have on our city website, we have for what are the current applications for minor projects, administrative projects. They're not ministerial projects, they're administrative projects. That's another thing. Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's now a page on the website that has those.
Correct. We are now posting all discretionary reviews. Previously, we only posted major reviews, but we're now posting all.
Thank you. So then I just also want to add support to Commissioner Rakusan's comment that we add up and accumulate impact in an area, especially looking at certain parts of town. Certain parts of town have higher population density in lower cost housing, and we should be more sensitive to the over nature of those neighborhoods already. And I don't think we have another program that addresses that. So it would be in this discretionary and findings process that come up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Liaison McDonald. Assistant City Attorney Brady, do you have something to add, or is your hand just?
No, sorry, let me take that down. But I will add too, just real quick, that any decision made by the planning director can be appealed to the reviewing body, which in most cases will be the Planning Commission. And
could also be elevated at the discretion of the director. So if the director feels that a particular parking reduction deserves a review authority, a multi-member review authority, then they could elevate that discretionary review to the Planning Commission or to HCPC.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Wissman?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for staff and the applicant today for bringing these topics to light. The nature of my questions are essentially to use this project as a case study. So I'm going to stay within my lane, but I do want to address the applicant since they're available to ask some of these questions. Most of my questions I think are directed to Mr. Patel and his team. But it is intended to inform my view on the zoning text amendment. So Mr. Patel, or any of your team, feel free to delegate. Do you now poll your guests regarding what mode of transportation they arrived, number of guests per vehicle or anything like that? Do you collect that type of data from your guests?
So we after our study session, we actually went out and created a poll and tried to get our guests to answer what form of transportation they were taking or how they got to the hotel, how many parking spaces. Unfortunately, we just couldn't get enough surveys from our guests. And the reason for that is because most guests are bypassing our check-in because Hilton, which is part of the Hampton Inn brand, allows for mobile check-in and you can use your device to open a door as well. So as a result, we weren't able to capture enough information to answer that question.
Okay. Do you currently, or have you ever offer shuttle services for either guests and or employees? Or has that ever been, considered on a cost benefit analysis or practicality basis?
We do not offer a shuttle service. Most people that come to us either are coming through a form of transportation, but the most common location or destination that our guests will go to is downtown, and they will walk given our proximity.
Okay. I saw a reference to e-bikes in the parking study. Do you currently offer any type of bike rental or scooter rental or any form of,
alternative
any of
modes? Yeah, no, we don't offer anything today.
Okay. And have you looked into any potential, partnerships with the other hotels in the area, especially with the I believe it's the Marriott that's down the street there, to partner on any of these, shuttles or bike rentals or any of those types of alternative modes of transportation?
We have not.
Similarly, in terms of, going back to how people arrive and maybe travel throughout the region, have you explored any co-marketing or any type of partnership program with Sonoma County Airport Express?
No, we've not looked into any partnership with Sonoma County Airport.
Okay. And how about SMART?
We offer our guests the SMART schedule, but we don't have a partnership with them, a specific one.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And for staff, has there been any benchmarking and comparison to the proposal for this minor parking adjustment, that 25% threshold? Are there any analogs to any other cities of similar size with similar type of traffic habits in Northern California and the county? Has there been any type of benchmarking?
There's not been, we haven't benchmarked against others. We that's something that I think we could do through the parking study. We do know that the city of Santa Rosa has a similar approach to discretionary parking reductions. And I believe a lot of municipalities are moving towards eliminating a minimum parking requirement in and around their downtown area. So I think that within the context of the work that we're doing with regard to studying parking and looking at alternatives, and as well as we currently have the downtown parking assessment district that doesn't require parking for downtown businesses or downtown land uses rather, that this offered a pathway to find a balance of both thinking about where what the parking study results might demonstrate, as well as thinking about the current parking assessment. So it did as Heather described, it gives us the flexibility to be responsive to project requests and to consider especially infill projects where land may be less available, but we still want the benefits of redevelopment, of the employment opportunities, of the support for our alternate transportation modes. So it allows us to be able to more thoughtfully consider a wider variety of projects, but do it through a discretionary process.
Got it. Okay. Appreciate the depth of your answer. Last question. So when assuming ZTA goes forward and when you're considering a minor adjustment, do you have a criteria, or is there a criteria in place that would evaluate, similar to some of the things that I don't claim that there was an exhaustive list of the things that I asked Mr. Patel, but will there be a process whereby you go down a checklist or some criteria to see if an applicant has explored, a number of alternatives before an adjustment is granted?
Sure. We do have the proposed findings C, which points to access to alternative transportation modes and incorporation of all alternative transportation programs. That's certainly one area where the review authority could look and say, what programs are you initiating or are you taking advantage of? I think that, as we look to SMART, as we look to the Sonoma County Airport Shuttle is a great example. Those agency or larger programs have a bit more longevity and durability. And sometimes if a private business owner was to initiate a program, it might be difficult to monitor that program and ensure that it's maintained. So to the extent that, larger agencies, whether they're transportation agencies or private sector businesses providing transportation alternatives, those would be more dependable alternative transportation programs.
Okay, that's it for me. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Commissioner Westman. Commissioner Potter?
Hey, I just wanted to thank everyone for the great presentations and staff report. I really do support the idea of having flexibility for our parking requirements. I also share some of the concerns that other commissioners have stated about how this might be applied at other sites. But at this particular site, I think it gives us the opportunity for a beneficial use and for an intensification of an underutilized area. And I did want to point out that based on the information that was presented on the vacancy rate and the current parking, that under most circumstances, if the current trends continue, there will be adequate parking at the on-site. It seems that it would be an unusual high occupancy that might require some other alternatives. But I think that with the SMART station nearby and the bus stop, that should be easily absorbed. So I do feel like this kind of eliminating minimum parking is a trend in Sonoma County and other communities that are trying to intensify and provide higher density in their downtown areas. And so I appreciate all the work, and I look forward to hearing the rest of the discussion.
All right, thanks so much, Commissioner Potter. I'll have a go now. I was just wondering, it's within our ability to change that 25% threshold between a minor and a major adjustment, right? We could, if we thought as commissioners that was too high, we could reduce that, right?
Yes, that is correct.
And then I was just curious, if we were to reduce that by a certain amount, how would that affect this project?
That's a great question. Thank you. So this project currently is requesting a 19% parking reduction. So if, say, for instance, you were to reduce it to 20% and make 20% the threshold between a minor and major adjustment, this project would still qualify for a minor adjustment, and HCPC could consider that. If you were to reduce it to, say, 15%, and have that be the threshold between minor and major, then the project would have to, and the zoning text amendment is adopted, then the project would have to turn around and submit a conditional use permit application for review by the Planning Commission.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. That answers that question. And then my other question, I know for these adjustments, there's a certain amount of off-site parking that's required, right, to meet the requirements. And right now, as the ZTA stands, can those off-site parking spaces be in front of residences?
No, because those would be considered on street then. So they would not, the entire, no aspect of the current parking ordinance considers on-street parking. So the requirement is always for off-street. They consider even shared parking arrangements off-site still require that the parking is off-street. So parking, go ahead.
Okay. No, I thought we could consider street parking. It has to be off-street parking to accommodate the extra spaces.
I believe that the review authority could consider the street network and the availability of on-street parking. But the proposed amendment doesn't direct them to do that.
Okay,
But
so
the discretion would allow them to find that through multiple factors that sufficient parking would be provided.
yes, what I'm trying to get at is I want to prevent us from approving things that would impact parking in residential areas by these businesses. So there's a catch for that, right?
We would want to, I believe we would want to add some language to direct that on-street parking should not be considered as a source of parking to meet demand for parking.
Yeah, I don't mind, like, I know this particular project, there's street parking, but it's not in front of residential areas. I don't know if there could be a distinction made for that. You know, a lot of the streets surrounding this particular application there are no homes in that immediate vicinity. So I don't want to discount those, but I do want to prevent us from impacting residential areas like the Payran area, for example, you know, which is very impacted for parking as it is.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if there's a distinction there that we could make in the language, or.
I think if I could work on that while you open the public hearing, and we could come back then and propose some language for consideration.
Okay.
Sure.
Just think about that. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, the other thing is, I know we're not doing comments now, we're just doing questions, but just another thing to think about is I'm very grateful for Commissioner Rakison's and the other commissioners' support of figuring out some sort of program that we could develop or use to track the cumulative impacts of this ZTA parking reduction that is in front of us, were it to be approved tonight, because I agree, this is kind of an experiment, and I'm you know, supportive of things that will reduce our reliance on cars and automobiles. So, but I do want to have some sort of safeguard in place to prevent it kind of going off the rails in the future in certain areas. So thinking about how to do that would be, I think, a great idea. And then my last question is, I want to acknowledge that Commissioner McErlean has some questions and maybe comments on the project. And I was wondering if it would be possible for him to be a member of the public during public comment and make his comments during that time, and switching him over. Is that possible?
I'll ask Assistant City Attorney Brady to answer that question. I believe we have considered
that. I feel that would be great. Yeah, that would be okay. Just, you know, he would have his public hat on and not his planning commissioner hat on.
Okay, so I don't know how you'll make that happen if, you know, if Mr. Commissioner McErlean needs to leave and come in as the public, or he could just raise his hand during public comment, or.
I think raising his hand would be fine. He would just be subject to the same 3 minutes like everyone else.
Great. Okay. Commissioner McErlean, I invite you to participate if you want to, please. Okay. Thank you. Okay, that's all I have now, and I'm going to hand it over to Chair Reinhardt. Sorry we took so long. We do that here in the Planning Commission. And please take your time and and take the helm from here. Thank you, Chair Reinhardt.
Thank you, Chair Bauer. So opening it up to HCPC committee member questions of staff and the applicant. And just to clarify, I think we're switching gears a little bit. So the committee's questions will be relative to the HSPAR and the landmark tree designation applications. So do we have anybody? I see committee member Van Ameron's hands raised. Alice.
Yeah, just a couple questions. I love the fact that the palm tree is not going to be moved. And so that's great news. But any thoughts about if the palm trees dies, or will it, eventually be replaced with another tree, or is that any thought about that?
Sure. Adriana, do you want to address that, or do you want me to address that?
Yeah, I think Isabel had mentioned that we would have tree protection throughout construction to make sure that the existing tree survives. I think if it were something were to happen, it would probably make a lot of sense to replace it. However, I think the significance of having this older, large palm tree and kind of celebrating that, we are dedicated to keeping it alive. So.
Okay, one other question is, so is this the first time that we're doing a landmark tree designation? I didn't know we had that.
This is Isabel speaking. And to answer your question, Vice Chair Amarin, within the time that I've been working with Petaluma, a landmark tree designation has not been presented to the HCPC. We do have with the Tree Advisory Board a list of trees that have been designated previous. And we also have a list of protected trees within our zoning code. This tree is not listed as one of the protected ones following the IZO, and therefore the applicant has submitted a specific landmark designation for this tree, which meets the 3 out of the 4 criteria from the municipal code.
Okay, that's all the questions that I have.
Thank you. Any other committee members? Let's see. I see no other. Oh, there we go. Committee member Perlis.
Yes, first apologies if my microphone is making noise and it's bothering anybody. I'll turn it off again once I finish my questions and comments. The main question I have at this point is it within the purview of the HCPC's review of this project to discuss the impact on on-street parking at all, not necessarily with respect to the IZO changes, but simply as part of this project?
I can maybe address that one if Andrew's not here. How I read the findings, and this might go to the chair's question and concern too about residential. I think the findings, at least in, I want to say it's subsection B, the number of parking spaces approved will be sufficient for the safe, convenient, and efficient operation of the use. I think you could take a lot of factors in consideration, whether on-street, off-street, whether the on-street it's residential, near commercial. So really, I think the findings are broad enough, but regarding the zoning text amendment, we're able to make any changes to recommend to council. And Commissioner Perlis, I think you'd be able to consider that for those findings here tonight.
Thank you. In that case, I do have some comments. I'll preface this by noting that I've had over 30 years of experience in operations research where we make decisions based on data. And it's my opinion that with the parking demand analysis that we've been provided, we have really no basis to even estimate the impact on on-street parking that will happen because of this project. Therefore, we are being asked to make a decision in the absence of data. And because of that, and amplifying one of Chair Bauer's comments, I think it's incumbent on us to inoculate the nearby residents from any possible effects of on-street parking impact. I don't know how staff can cause this to happen, either through signage or through positive signage saying that there are only certain areas that will be signed as hotel overflow parking, or through negative signage that hotel guests may not park in these regions. But I would like to see something done for the residents along Jefferson specifically, so the block faces that their homes are on won't be impacted. And if possible, give them some sort of remedy in case impacts do happen that are negative to them. And that is the extent of my comment in that area. As far as the project itself is concerned, I'll echo committee person Van Ameron's comment that it's good to see the revisions to the design to protect the tree. The design is still, in my opinion, perfectly acceptable relative to the Secretary of Interior standards, and subject to, again, protections for the local residents from potential on-street parking impacts. I would personally vote to approve. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from HCPC committee members? Okay, I have a few, primarily for the applicant. So first of all, I understand from our workshop we had in July that really one of the goals of this proposal is to provide a different product type, and that you're limited by what the rooms you have are all single kings. And I'm wondering if there's anything preventing you from converting 2 single kings to a family suite with a lock-off alternative or something like that. Is there any reason why that can't be done to kind of achieve the goal?
Sure, I'll talk a little bit about that. So the width of the existing building is not wide enough in terms of a bay to fit 2 queen beds on the center of a hallway, if that makes sense, right? So the hallway goes right down the middle of the building, and the width of those guest rooms prevent it from having 2 beds. So that's why we're limited on the existing count that we have. In terms of taking 2 king beds and then having a connecting door between them, I think that's the question. It would further just reduce our key count in a really challenging time to do business in terms of labor costs rising. And so it would have adverse effects to us in our instance, because we would go down from 75 to a lower key count. And so it would actually put more pressure on the hotel itself.
Yeah, my understanding was that you had an overabundance of single kings, and what you really needed were suites. So I was thinking lock-offs would help you with that. But I get it. So a couple of specific detailed questions. First of all, what's the dimension between the east wall of the new building and the face of the curb at the parking lot? And how much of that is dedicated to the car bumper overhang? It looks very tight, and I'm just, I might be misreading it, but it looks like it's 5 or 6 feet total with a couple feet of bumper overhang. Do we know what that is?
Yeah. I believe we have at least 6 feet.
And 2 feet of it is kind of designated bumper overhang for a reduced parking stall depth. Is that right?
That's what it currently is. And obviously we need to meet egress. And so if that building does need to shift a foot to allow for that, we would do that.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Okay. The roof and siding color of the proposed material, on the materials board, it says it matches existing. But it doesn't look like it. Is that really a match, or is this a new color that's similar? Or, how is it intended to match?
It is. It is intended to match the exact same standing seam color and manufacturer.
Okay, and that's the roofing on the Silk Mill as well as the engine house?
Yes.
Great, good. Okay, next, the octagonal planter that's around the palm, that's the metal and the wood, is the proposal to keep that thing and build around it?
Yes. So the proposal is we have to keep that because the roots are above the surrounding grade. So it's kind of like a retaining wall in a way. We would want to look into treating it some way on the exterior to make it look a little nicer. However, we would have to keep the core of that to maintain the tree's health and protect the roots.
So you're not proposing necessarily to keep that as is exactly. Good.
Right. We'd make it prettier.
Thank you. Okay. One last question then. The engine house has a pretty nice profile on the gutter and eave detail, and it says it's intended to match in the new building, but I don't really see it. Is that your intention?
Yes, it is intended to match, and I think it may look a little different only because it's painted a different color. And so with the new proposed, everything's kind of that same standing seam color, whereas the engine building has this off-white trim that kind of highlights.
Great, thank you. So that's all my questions, and I don't see any other HCPC members' hands raised. So let's see, I'll turn it back over to Chair Bauer.
Great, thanks very much, Chair Reinhardt and HCPC committee members. We'll now move on to our public comment, and I will let our moderator, Eric Roberts, take over from here. Take it away, Eric.
Great, thank you, Chair Bauer. I'll provide just a few moments for any attendees joining us tonight to raise their hands. I do see Commissioner McFarlane is raising his hand. I'll go ahead and share my timer for Commissioner McFarlane.
Thank you. My comments are related to the landscape of the project. Adding the landscape architect after a site plan approved does not make any sense whatsoever. The landscape takes room, the parking takes room, the building takes room. They all have to be worked out as one effort and one site plan and one submittal, not after the fact. The parking lot shift that Bill mentioned, the parking lot edge is solid concrete. There will be no landscape between the building and the parking and the bumper. That's unacceptable. I think you should consider shifting that parking lot eastward. There's more open space on that edge of the site, and you could get more landscape or some trees between the parking and the building, which I think is important. I drove around the site. The overall site is in very poor maintenance of landscape. I don't trust that whoever is doing the maintenance knows what they're doing, or maybe the overall management doesn't know how to direct them, but the landscape's in poor shape. Many trees are poorly staked, many trees look chlorotic, and so the overall site needs attention, and a landscape architect could help provide that. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner McFarlane. Up next is a member of our public joining us tonight, Richard. Richard, I've allowed you to speak. You'll need to unmute yourself, and I will ask you please state your full name for the record. Once again, Richard, you'll need to unmute yourself. Seem to be having some problems with Richard unmuting himself. I may defer to Planning Manager Triple to see how we would proceed with this, or perhaps our city attorney.
It looked like he was unmuted for a second, but then came on. I don't know. Is it possible, Eric, to go forward with comments from HCPC staff and PC staff here? And if the microphone unmutes, to pause and do that, or
I'm perfectly fine returning to public comments. It seems Richard may be having some trouble unmuting.
Maybe we can,
Eric, do you-
there he goes.
Am I on?
Yep.
Oh, we can hear you now, Richard.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm located at Petaluma Butane across the street, and I basically, you could say, lived there for 50 years. I just left there now only because my battery was about to die and I had to come home to plug in the charger. Anyway, so Wilson has a high-speed takeoff off Lakeville. There's some fast traffic comes down Wilson Street, and truck deliveries are there daily. The stop sign at Wilson Jefferson gets run daily. The street is narrow, it's substandard width. There's no center line on the street. The construction parking, I don't know how that's going to be handled. There's vehicles with trailers parked on the street there, and some of them are guests of the hotel that take up 3 to 4 parking spaces. I submitted a letter, which I don't know if I need to read it or if the submittal is enough. I believe that this property is a destination property. I think that the decision's being made more on speculation than actual facts. The SMART train services San Rafael and Santa Rosa primarily, and I can't imagine they get much traffic from San Rafael and Santa Rosa, and especially the SMART train has limited hours, and I don't even think they run after dark. They get a lot of vehicles there after 8 o'clock arrival tonight. The parking lots on the Wilson side were probably about 90% occupied, and there was about 6 vehicles on Wilson Street. And one of them had a little camper trailer behind it. I did not go on the Lakeville side to look. And I think it's being speedied along. I think this is a wonderful plan for restaurants and shopping events, because there you get people that truly carpool and they're local, but I don't see much local people going to a hotel. I think most of the travel is going to require a rental car or a physical car, and the bus is not heavily traveled. And let's face it, would you want to travel in public transportation with 2 or 3 suitcases and your laptop and, you know, a few other things that you might get roughed up on? So anyway, I think you need to give this some serious thought. I think this type of property is not appropriate to reduce the parking. And in my letter, I figured they need 109 or 107 spaces. There's 5 handicap spaces which can't be used. And then there's, you know, all kinds of people that work there. There's going to be maids and housemen, and, you know, it's not just the manager parking there. There's another, you know.
Richard, I apologize. The 3-minute time limit has expired for your comment on this item. And moving along, I do not see any additional hands raised for public comment on this item. I'll stop sharing my screen and pass it back to Chair Bauer.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Roberts. We'll now move on to commissioner and committee member comments. First, we'll start with Planning Commission, because that will dictate how HCPC members proceed. So we'll ask the planning commissioners for their comments on the zoning text amendment. And we'll also, at the end, get a roll call vote to see if this passes and if there are any changes that are made. And after that, I'll hand the reins over to Chair Reinhardt. They can facilitate comments from HCPC. So we'll start the planning commissioner comments first. And let's see, I have Commissioner Rakusin first. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Power. And I really appreciate kind of all the discussion that went into this, especially this ZTA. And in thinking about the required findings section, and I'm really saying something that Chair Bauer brought up, which is just adding language. I had written here, you know, not to unduly restrict or reduce on-street parking supply on the area surrounding the site and not to negatively impact congestion and safety on roadways surrounding the site. And I know this sounds like, from hearing Planning Manager Tripple's explanation, that's kind of implicit in the positive declarations of required findings. But I thought adding kind of that other defining in the negative of what we are going to make sure doesn't happen would be a useful tool as well, just to, if nothing else, for public peace of mind, that is something being built into the required findings. And then just to play that idea of a feedback mechanism, I would love to hear staff comment. And I know Planning Manager Triple, you had an idea of, to recommend the zoning text amendment with a further recommendation to add kind of this feedback mechanism, some either objective data. I'm not sure what that would look like. And obviously we wouldn't want to make something that's so onerous on city staff, but when there is minor or major adjustments made in terms of parking, what would be some measure do you think that we could add that could gather feedback on those projects and then have data on cumulative effects to build into later decision making? Do we have any idea what that might look like? I thought like subjective from folks around there, but there's got to be an objective way of measuring.
Sure. So we've been thinking about that, and I think one thing that we could certainly do is to map data where a project has received a parking reduction, and we would be able to map that so that a project planner who receives a new application that requests a parking reduction would be able to, to open a layer and look and see what projects in the surrounding area have had parking reductions as well, granted to them as well. And then, of course, we would have the data through the project approval to be able to see, what percentage of reduction was granted. And then we would always have the discretion based upon that to request that the parking demand analysis or parking demand study consider those factors. So I think that would be probably the best way, given that, as always with data collection and data analysis, there's a resource need that has to be addressed. So I think if we were able to at least map approvals and then direct that a parking analysis or parking study consider the cumulative impacts, that then the resource requirement would be on the applicant.
Yeah, and to Commissioner Council Liaison McDonald's point, we wouldn't want to make it too onerous on the applicant, but that sounds well within reason to know that there are other projects that have had your approval, and now we need to have you take that into account when you look at the impact of your specific project. And then, the final thing here, just looking at this traffic study, parking study that was provided by the applicant as a model for future studies, I was struck, and I word searched a bunch so I didn't sound like a fool, but I didn't see a specific analysis of their actual current occupancy of the hotel. I saw the averages from ITE of their type of hotel, but I wondered in looking at, for the future, in abiding by this ZTA measure, when we're deciding kind of what is that threshold we're going to require, would that be something that should be standard for a hotel is, hey, we need your actual occupancy data to match, to make that calculation, not an industry average? And then I also noticed that, and I thought it was very enlightening discussion between yourself and Chair Bauer about off-site does not equate to on-street parking. Off-site implies off-street as well. And so in the analysis provided, there's a heavy or diagrams about on-street parking in the surrounded areas and their relative vacancy rates, and how that plays into, again, that required findings element, where we're not necessarily looking at on-street vacancy as part of this. And it sounds like obviously this determination is going to be made tonight by HCPC, whether or not this meets the ZTA that we on planning are approving. But as a model, I just wonder, taking those kind of things into consideration, if where we are in terms of that relative threshold, if this kind of bears it out. Again, with the big thing being that it sounds like on-street cannot be an implicit part of the findings that, so that's my thought about that one. I don't know if there's again, answer for that. Maybe that just falls to HCPC to consider. But when we do get around to vote, I would love to talk about requiring some kind of feedback mechanism and maybe adding some kind of negative declaration about, impact on surrounding on-street parking. But those are my comments for now.
Great. Thank you very much, Commissioner Rakusin. We have Vice Chair Hooper next.
Thank you very much, Chair Bauer. First of all, I just want to say I really think this policy is going to help us out compared to where we've been before. And I say that because we've been in too many of these meetings where we've wanted to look at reducing parking, where we've wanted to look at ways to grant exactly these kinds of reductions, and we haven't had the ability to do it. I also just would like to put in perspective that long-term, we're looking at major reductions in parking minimums. I'm sure at some point we'll be looking at parking maximum in areas. I can tell you, not just with AB 2097, but also bills in the pipeline right now, the state's moving towards really minimizing, if not altogether restricting, the ability to really push minimums in the long term. So a policy like this is really the least painful way to start pivoting in that direction. And I appreciate it for what it is. It's not the solution that Petaluma is going to have in 10 years. It's the solution for right now while staff is working in the background. Because of that, I do want to see data feedback, but I'm far more interested in seeing that program attached to what the long-term policy ends up looking like. And I think that's, I'm assuming, going to be much more visible once we're looking at the next general plan and the IZO following that. Now, the other thing I wanted to frame around this too is we've looked at VMT standards in the last year. I know we're going to have more procedures to come out of that. I'm sure parking impacts will affect that as well, which will make policies like this that much more important. So one thing I'd like to say is this is us ripping off the Band-Aid. I've noticed from the discussion, there seems to be a lot of discomfort because people don't want to see parking taken up in street neighborhoods. I get why. At the same time, that frustration is how you get mode shift. That frustration and the congestion, this is how you start to get people shifting away from single-use vehicles. You do it through policies like this, and you accept that you're going to have a certain amount of frustration that comes with it, but that's how you move people over time. So if we really want to meet our goals, especially our climate emergency and our long-term climate goals, we'll need policies far more impactful than this, which is why not only will I support this, I do think having the added line referencing the difference between off-site and on-street is very important. I do think collecting data is useful, though I would stress this should be kept to effective but not onerous, because I do think that this will only go so far given this is at best a bridge policy. And outside of that, that's the end of my comment. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Vice Chair Hooper. Commissioner Wissman?
Thank you, Chair Bauer. Just brief comments in conclusion. I'm generally supportive of relaxing the parking requirements. I think for all the reasons stated by numerous staff and other commissioners. I'm also comfortable with the 25% threshold. I frankly probably be comfortable with a higher threshold than that, but I think 25% is a good kind of evolutionary next step. Has been cited, most recently by Chair Hooper. And I, although it's not within our purview, I would provide the editorial that I think this Hampton expansion is a good example of the benefits of that flexibility and seeing a project like this be able to, to expand and continue serving the community. Thanks.
Great. Thanks very much, Commissioner Wissman. Commissioner Potter?
Hey, I just wanted to thank everyone, and I agree with what the other commissioners have said, and particularly with Vice Chair Hooper's discussion about, kind of the changing of the mode here. But at the same time, I am interested in protecting as much residential on-street parking as we can, and I like the idea that maybe we could either do signage so that we could indicate to the hotel guests the areas not to park, but certainly information could be given out either at the front counter, or I guess now a lot of times people are doing their check-in through their phones, but still there's directions about what amenities are at the hotel, and there could also be a little bit about parking there. I also wanted to add that although I'm comfortable with the 25% reduction for the minor, if there are other commissioners who want to go a little slower, I would also support a 20%. And those are my comments. I'm generally in support of this amendment.
Great, thanks very much, Commissioner Potter. Council Liaison McDonald.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm generally in support of this. I think it's a good. It's going to be good for many sites, as said. Gives more latitude to projects coming through to be headed in the right direction. And I love the Band-Aid metaphor. That's exactly what this is. I don't want those who. I don't want our climate goals to be on the back of the lowest cost housing occupants in town, but it could be that is what this directs to. I do see this puts a burden on the traffic study, all those caveats, what's the checklist and everything. I think that the traffic study gets very, exhaustive, shall we say, in a good way. And it could lead to things like neighborhood permit parking and other things, but this is a lumpy road we're gonna have to take a few steps on here. It bothers me that the technical data provided in the traffic support report is in conflict with the empirical data in the traffic report. That's a bother. But like I said, I'm a big supporter in heading us in this direction. And I do like the 20% if we can get a consensus on that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Council Liaison McDonald. Commissioner McCarrollane.
Yes, I support the parking reduction for this project as a model, primarily because of the occupancy rate. I think that's more of a good target than full occupancy. I also agree there should be further definition of criteria for parking reduction. And I support closer to 20% as a target.
Great, thank you very much, Commissioner McCarrollane. I'll go to now, and I agree with Commissioner Hooper that this is the way that to go, and there may be some growing pains as we reduce our reliance on vehicles, but I prefer not to really impact the residential communities surrounding these businesses as much as might happen when we're not really there yet. I think we're going to get there, but it's going to be slow. And I support reducing in any way that we can, reducing impacts to the residential neighborhoods, either by putting language in to not allow residential areas to be used as part of the count towards off-street parking. If we can, I don't know if I have other commissioner support for that or not, but I also would also support putting in the cumulative impacts, as Commissioner Rakusin said, and also that our planning manager mentioned that he thinks we could do, so I'm supportive of that. So hopefully we'll be able to get to that. And then I do think that, I do want to go with a little bit baby steps. So I'm also supportive of the 20% in reduction for now. And then as, again, this is a bridge policy. So as we go forward, maybe we can get up there, but I'm supportive of starting a little bit lower at the 20% too. Those are my comments. And I'm not sure, Planning Manager Triple, what other information you need from us? Any other clarifications on who wants what? I know he kind of gave you a mess, but ask away.
So I think that a motion to recommend adoption should include a modification of language. It sounds like the commission would prefer to reduce that threshold to 20% for a minor adjustment. So we would want to modify that language, or at least propose modification of the language to reduce that to 20% for a minor adjustment. I think that then the second point about on-street parking, what I would propose that the commission consider a modification is to, it would be finding B, proposed finding B, which currently reads, the number of parking spaces approved will be sufficient for the safe, convenient, and efficient operation of the use. A modification to that could be the number of parking spaces approved exclusive of any on-street parking spaces will be sufficient for the safe, convenient, and efficient operation of the use. And that would then have the effect of removing the consideration of on-street parking spaces from the review authority's findings. So that I think gives us enough flexibility. It draws attention to what the commission finds important, which is that on-street parking, especially adjacent to residential areas, not be negatively impacted. But at the same time, it allows the analysis to proceed and allows the review authority maximum discretion. I also do want to note that the municipal code currently does have language that allows establishment of residential permit parking areas. So should there be cumulative impacts at some point in time that are unrealized, a residential area would be able to take advantage of requesting a permit parking area through, I believe it's municipal code section 11.44.140. Then finally, thinking about the impacts of this particular ordinance and the ability to reduce parking on residential areas and especially affordable housing, what we're finding now is that I think without exception, all affordable housing either can reduce parking or eliminate parking. So I think in fact what we might find is that potentially there's more potential for the reverse to happen, that an affordable housing project may over-reduce without discretion, whereas we are continuing to provide discretion to ensure that we're sensitive to reductions. Then I think I'm curious, so I was considering that hotels are required to analyze occupancy, and I really like that recommendation. I'm wondering if that should simply be guidance to staff as an administrative policy to ensure that that a parking demand analysis or parking demand study, when a hotel use is proposed or when a parking reduction is proposed associated with a hotel use, that the analysis does consider specifically occupancy of that particular hotel property. And we could do that, I believe, through administrative policy, use this meeting as direction to staff, as well as to collect data or map data to be able to analyze the cumulative impacts and have that for consideration of the review authority. I believe that as well is appropriate as an administrative policy and direction to staff.
And where would that be? Where would that be made as an administrative policy?
You would, through your comments in this evening's meeting, we would just, we always have administrative policies for the implementation of new ordinances, and they evolve as time goes on. So we always do have considerations for especially for new ordinances as we learn how to refine them upon implementation. So staff can, as a matter of process and procedure, ensure that we're mapping data about parking reductions that have been approved, and ensure that if we do have a hotel use seeking a parking reduction under the minor or major adjustments, that we're asking them to analyze occupancy for that particular operation.
And I suppose those findings would go into the review process and be reported out to whatever the reviewing body is, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Are there any other comments or last questions from planning commissioners? I thought I saw a hand up. No, Commissioner Rockiston.
Thanks, Chair Bauer. Should we make that motion now? I think the adjustments to the text amendment sounded great. And I don't know if there needs to be a separate motion for the administrative guidance or if that's just stated, not a motion. But yeah, I'm chomping at the bit. When can we?
Go ahead and make the motion. I don't think the administrative policies need to be included. Correct me if I'm wrong, right? Yeah.
No, we've got ample direction from this evening's discussion. So thank you for that.
Yeah. I think the only modifications that need to be included are the 20% change and the change to finding B, which would exclude on-street parking spaces being considered, right?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, I would happily move that item.
Second.
Okay, let's get a roll call vote. Ms. Ellis, please.
And that was Hooper that seconded. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, Bauer.
Aye.
Hooper.
Aye.
Wisman.
Yes.
McErlane.
Yes.
Potter.
Aye.
Rockiston.
Aye.
McDonald.
Aye.
It looks like we've got 7 ayes, 7 yeses.
Right. Thanks very much, Ms. Ellis. And thank you, planning commissioners, for your thoroughness as always. And thank you, HPC staff, for your patience. I'll now turn it over to Chair Reinhardt.
Great. Thank you, Chair Bauer. Let's see. So since this is all one item and the public hearing's been conducted, I'll open it up to the HCPC for comments related to the HSPAR and the landmark tree designation. Do we have any hands up? Okay, Committee Member Van Omeren.
Thanks. Just some comments about the SPAR. It really helped that we had that study session in July. We talked a lot about the project, obviously, its historical significance, and then also that really this addition is different than the historical building, and therefore I think we all pretty much were in agreement that that it didn't really impact the silk mill building itself. So we talked about that a lot. We had a lot of suggestions, and a lot of those things were addressed. The only two that kind of, we did ask for some increase in flora. We also had a comment from the public about that. And it does seem to come up a little bit tonight. So that would be kind of the only thing that's kind of left over. The landmark tree designation, I think, is excellent. I think that's a great tool to be used for this project as well as other projects moving forward. Again, both the applicant and the architect really addressed some of our issues. The windows, aligning the windows a lot better, etc. So the only thing that wasn't addressed that we talked about last one was maybe restoring the ghost sign that was on the building, and that was mentioned, and I didn't hear that again tonight, so I don't know if there's any way of adding that to it. And then So those are my only comments related to the history part. And I'm in support of the parking reduction as well for this project. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Okay, Committee Member Whitley.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I wanted to make a brief comment saying I appreciate the comprehensive and clear reports presented by staff and the applicant as well. All of the questions I had regarding the appropriateness of the addition were answered essentially in those reports. I didn't really have anything beyond that. So on that basis, I just wanted to say I support that, the new addition and the plan. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, Committee Member Perlis.
Thank you, Chair. One of the comments from our study session that I would like to reiterate, brought up by Chairman Reinhardt, and that is that I think that you could go to a 9-pane window setup instead of the 2-pane that's shown in the drawings without compromising the differentiation between historical and new structures. And it would, I believe, please the eye if it were done. I'm not quite ready to put that in as a condition, but if Chairman Reinhardt did want to do that, I would support it. I'm not entirely clear of what the implications are in the Planning Commission's deliberations of removing on-street parking from the parking reduction consideration. And I'm also not sure if the HCPC did or does approve the project, if there will have to be at this point a further study to try to estimate parking requirements before the study proceeds or not. So could somebody in staff enlighten me on that?
Commissioner Perlis, I did want to add a few comments regarding your parking question and extend the conversation to Andrew as well. The condition within the HSPAR draft resolution includes a 19% reduction, which falls under that minor opportunity within that ZTA. That additional language for the off-street parking, I believe, wouldn't apply to this project. We can also include language and modify the draft condition to support signage where parking is limited to the site.
Thank you very much, Isabel. I would urge my fellow committee people to support a condition requiring such signage to at least try to head off any potential problems. And that's the end of my comments at this point.
Great. Thank you, Committee Member Perlis. So I think that leaves it to me, and I, as usual, have a bunch of comments. And but seeing as this is the only design review in front of this project, I've got a few that might fall outside the normal HSPAR purview, but I think they'll be useful. So I want to thank the applicant team, especially for revising the proposal after our meeting in July. I think saving the Phoenix in place and keeping some outdoor amenity, I think, is a good addition. So thanks for that. And I have a few specific comments about that. But first, I just have to say my biggest concern is that with this building, the site just seems overbuilt. You know, having the building rise right out of the sidewalk 4 feet from a bumper of a car is just really unfortunate. So, you know, as I said earlier, I wish you could convert some of the inside units and get some lockoffs to give you the suites you need, and then maybe lop off 4 of these. But I don't think I'm going to make that a condition or anything. I needed to say it because I think it's that, as Commissioner McErlin said, that's an unacceptable condition over there. And I don't think it'll be satisfactory for your guests. So I think at the very least, if you can't move the parking lot over or the building, I think even if you had a 6-inch planter or something along the east wall of the new building and you had some Boston ivy or something in there that would grow up and green up the wall of the building, I think, that's minimal, but I think it would go a long way to mitigating that condition. So I recommend that. Now, regarding the architecture and its compatibility with the existing, I agree with Committee Member Perlis. I'm going back to what I said in the earlier workshop. There are already 3 distinct vocabularies, with the existing buildings, and but they're all sort of unified by the 9/9 double hung windows. And I think that it's great. It really feels like a family of buildings that have evolved. With this new building, even though the siding somewhat matches the roofing, it just feels like it's another building. And even though the windows are aligned horizontally, when you're looking at it from 2nd floor elevation, it just seems like it's too much of a departure. So I agree that this building, at least the guest room windows, should have the divided light double hung windows, or single hung anyway, but true divided lights. And I don't know if they need to be 9/9, they seem smaller, but something that's compatible and complementary. Either that or, one of the things needs to relate, whether it's the siding or the windows, but I think it's too much of a departure. Also, a minor detail, but on the east side of the north facade, I think the window placement and size is kind of not congruous there. It's a little awkward, and I don't think it fits in with the rhythm of the other buildings. And I would recommend that you look at resizing or replacing the windows just on that. I think there are 4 openings on that wall. Now, regarding the palm tree courtyard, I think this could be a really nice space. But I think that octagon that's there, it creates some really awkward shapes and corners. And I think to make that really great, that should just get removed. I realize it has to stay at its elevated ground level, but maybe a new raised planter surrounding the tree could kind of be built so that it feels like it's part of the foundation, so that it's built into the building. So that, and then maybe it has a nice cap with a seat wall that creates an edge to that plaza. And then there's some understory planting around the palm tree. I think that would, help to make that courtyard feel more like a landscape courtyard than having a box with a tree sticking out of it. And I think both inside and outside, with that full height glazing there, so having some a buffer of green between the inside and the outside, I think it would help the courtyard feel less like it's in a fishbowl. And I think it would feel from inside, like you're in more of a finished building. So that's reconfigure that planter, include a seat wall, have some understory planting, and make it feel like it's intentional, not like a remnant. And similarly, the paving at the edge of the courtyard, where you're showing new unit pavers of some kind, but it just abuts up against the existing, kind of really very white new concrete. And I think if you were to jack out that section of existing concrete between the new courtyard and the silk mills, and then just make it all the pavers, whatever they are, probably bricks would be appropriate, but so that it feels like a contiguous courtyard, not like a patio that was tacked onto the edge of a concrete sidewalk. So I think that should be paved out kind of consistently. Let's see, I agree with Commissioner McErlin's comments about some of the maintenance and the landscape. And I don't know if it can be made a condition of this project that, that the landscape plantings be restored to what was approved with the silk mill renovation, at least where they're not now covered with buildings. But at the very least, I think there are 2 oak trees at the entrance to the driveway that that I think are critical to the future, the overall landscape of the site. There's another pair at the west end, and I think, with two at each end that'll really bookend the site and help to unify all the buildings. But the two that are immediately adjacent to this building, one of them was planted right next to the storm drain catch basin, and I think it really has no future. And then the other one is just sort of sadly strapped to this stake and leaning over there. I don't know if it just needs to be unstaked or restaked, but one in particular, I guess it's the one on the west side of the driveway, needs to be replaced and repositioned with a new specimen that's placed where it has room to grow. Anyway, let's see. There's a condition about the louvered parapet mechanical screen, which I don't really have an issue with that. I wouldn't want it to go away, is all I want to say, is that I think it does kind of bring a contemporary element above that glass wall. So there may be some treatment that's more compatible with the historic architecture, but I would want to make sure that it doesn't go away. So let's see. The ghost sign restoration, I completely agree with that. I know that was verbally agreed to in the initial entitlement hearing, and it just never got done, and it's never been, we talked about it again at the workshop, and it didn't show up in this application. So I don't know if that needs to be added as a condition this time. I would favor that. So that's it for me. That's a lot. I have this distilled into half dozen conditions that I would recommend we add, and I can read them back. Regarding the landmark tree designation, I fully support that and thank the applicant for bringing that to us. And I don't know if we would I would move that forward as is, and I don't know how we're going to adopt these two resolutions, but and then maybe I recommend we add some conditions to the HSPAR resolution. But first, I don't know, maybe I've dumped a lot of stuff out. Maybe the applicant has some reaction, or maybe some committee members want to add follow-up comments. Again, I have these written out. I can share with you. So anybody else like to speak? I see Committee Member Whitley.
Yeah, I would say that, a lot of the conditions that you're talking about relate to the silk mill structure itself and the landscape of the site. I don't see that as part of this addition. If we want to make a condition that the applicant do a landscape analysis or a landscape study of the larger hotel itself, that would be something that we could ask for, or the ghost sign and various other parts of that, I think, are part of a landscape or an analysis of how well the previous rehabilitation of the building has proceeded and whether it's changed over time. I think that's kind of a separate study, and I saw that as something that shouldn't be entailed by this addition, unless you just make it a condition saying that study should be done, rather than saying, well, this should be done and that should be done and so on the silk mill itself. I think we should say, if we want to add a condition to this application, it's just that the applicant does a study of what else needs to be done at the silk mill itself, and leave that kind of open-ended.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, I don't see any more hands. Oh, okay, Planning Manager Triple.
Great, thank you, Chair Reinhardt. Two items. The first regarding condition of approval number 21, where we make the findings for approval of a 19% reduction in minimum required parking. I want to note that under finding B, so it would be, let's see, 21B, the last sentence says, based upon survey data of on-street parking within 2 blocks of the site, the study concludes that nearly 70% of available spaces are not utilized. I would like to request that we strike that last sentence so that there's no reference to on-street parking, which would then be consistent with the modification to the zoning text amendment that Planning Commission has adopted.
Yes, agreed. And thanks for bringing that up. I did want to say, ask you, with that change, then the applicant is kind of faced with a potential condition that they might not have been planning for. I see this, I think the discussion was great, and the ZTA is a good idea. But I think when we get into writing permanent code in the general plan update in the new zoning ordinance, if it's specifically stated that, on-street parking is not, or with the ZTA, that on-street parking is not available to the hotel, and then further measures are taken where signs go up, then they may have been banking on this and it just wasn't explicitly stated today. They'll have to resolve that in their own way in the future. Is that right? I mean, they'll still be faced with having to deal with their guests parking somewhere.
Well, sure. A couple of thoughts. First is I think it's important that HCPC is comfortable that it can make the findings for the parking reduction without consideration of the availability of on-street parking. So in other words, you would look at the parking demand study and what is analyzed with regard to occupancy rates, and then also look at its proximity to alternate modes of transportation and alternative transportation programs. And so that I feel that the draft findings that are proposed by staff focus on those factors that are not related to on-street parking. That last sentence was added because on-street parking was analyzed in the parking demand study, but the recommendations coming out of the parking demand study don't make reference to availability of on-street parking. So I think that, again, I feel that HCPC needs to consider the findings and affirm for themselves individually that they can make those findings without reference to the on-street parking. But planning staff is comfortable eliminating that sentence from the findings and relying on those other factors that reduce demand for parking for the project. So answer to that. And then second, we do recommend that a condition of approval be added requiring that the hotel install signage at the exits to the parking lots indicating that that guests should not, in some form, that guests should not park on street adjacent to residential uses. And then also to notify guests of that through the check-in process and other communications.
I agree. I support that. Do any committee members disagree? I do think it kind of puts us in a little bit of a pickle because, in reviewing the analysis and seeing that graphic that showed all the, on-street availability parking, I rationalized it that way because I know that the land use immediately adjacent is pretty low density. And I thought this was a great opportunity to experiment and find out what will really happen with a parking reduction for a hotel. But given that, from what Mr. Patel said, there's no outreach. I mean, I don't know how many of the guests are coming by alternative modes of transportation. I wish they were. I think the Sonoma County Airport Express is a great option. And if they had a shuttle to that, I could see it working out just fine. So maybe we'll just hope that can be made to work once they realize they don't have enough parking. So thinking about that, I'm prepared to make that finding. Does anybody disagree? Okay. Well, Mr. Triple, can I give you my list of what I see as conditions to add?
Sure, of course, it would be great to review them.
Yeah, okay. And I just, again, kind of keep it simple, but one is to add a planter along the east foundation and vines to grow up the facade. Two is that the guest room windows should have true divided lights, and the pattern or proportion should be complementary to existing. Resize or respace the windings on the east side of the north facade. For being remove the octagonal planter and incorporate a new planter with seat wall into the building foundation or similar, and provide understory planting. Existing concrete adjacent to new courtyard be removed and replaced with pavers to match courtyard. Replace existing oak in west planter at driveway with 36-inch box to match. And then I think I would like to add restore the ghost sign as previously agreed to. And then as Committee Member Whitley suggested, to review existing landscape conditions and elevate the level of maintenance, restore trees where they have failed, something like that. I think that's it. Yeah. Does anybody have any negative response to any of those? Okay. Isabel?
Thanks, Brian Hart, for providing those suggested conditions. I do agree with adding and requesting more details for the landscape, for the site, and for the rear expansion and the site in general. I do want to add additional comment towards the ghost signage to provide staff to review the previous request for the previous project as part of the hotel rehabilitation and to limit that scope from this rear expansion. I also want to share the recommendations through historic preservation that I have come across of the preservation of a ghost sign versus repainting that and covering up the deterioration. There is available resources and opportunities to preserve the ghost sign as it deteriorates. So I kind of want to recommend adjusting the limitations of this project with the ghost signage, and potentially staff can further review that component towards the previous rehabilitation work. And I just wanted to share that with the group.
That's good. You'll want to watch the, I can't remember which hearing, but it was stated verbally in one of the public hearings for that. Okay. Thank you, Isabel. Okay, then we have two.
Excuse me, Chair.
Oh, yeah.
Committee Member Perlis has his hand raised.
Thank you. Committee Member Perlis?
Just wanted to make sure we get the signage conditions added to your list.
So,
and could I make a quick question, to the applicant? If you were enjoined from making any impact on street parking beyond what is there now, would you be able to go ahead with your project?
Say that one more time.
If you were prevented from making any further impact to on-street parking beyond what is currently occurring, would you be able to go ahead with your project?
I firmly believe that I think that we have the capacity today with a parking reduction that we would be able to build out those 18 rooms.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Now, Committee Member Perlis, Planning Manager Triple added a condition that the signs be placed at the exits from the hotel parking lot to inform guests that they should not park on street. Is that adequate, or did you want to see signs on the street?
not an expert on how signage should work. I would leave that to staff to come up with the best solution as long as they were convinced that the signage was adequately placed.
Yeah. I thought the solution was a good one. I would support it.
Chair Reinhardt, I think that both Isabel and I do understand the direction from the HCPC regarding signage. We would want to coordinate with Public Works. And if it is possible to, place no hotel guest parking signage adjacent to residential uses, then we can certainly work with the applicant to do that. But I think we do need direction from Public Works on what can be signed in those areas.
Yeah. And my preference would be not to clutter up the neighborhood with a lot of signs, but if it can be done discreetly on site, that would be ideal.
Okay, thank you, sir.
I would echo that same comment as well. I think having clean sidewalks has a better appeal. And I think we can do a job through our website in terms of reservations and making people aware, as well as a sign, at the two entrances to notify that guests should not park on the streets.
Thank you. Okay, so we have two motions in front of us to adopt two separate resolutions. Can we move them forward as, do we need to move them separately?
Yes, Chair, you should move them forward separately for consideration.
Okay, how about, do we have a motion to move the landmark tree designation?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
Great, thank you. Evelyn, can we get a roll call?
Reinhardt,
Yes.
Van Omeren,
Yes.
Perlis,
Yes.
Pitangaro, absent, Whitley.
Yes.
That's 4 yeses.
Great. Okay, and then for the HSPAR, we have some added conditions. Does anybody want to move that forward? Do we need to read that back, or can we get a motion?
I'll move that we accept the HSPAR subject to the conditions listed by Chairman Reinhardt and Planning Manager Trippel.
I'll second that.
Great. Evelyn?
I'm sorry, who seconded it? Whitley?
I did.
Okay, great, thank you. Reinhardt,
Yes.
Van Omeren,
Yes.
Perlis,
Yes.
Pitangaro, absent, Whitley.
Yes.
4 yeses. Motion passed.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, I think one thing I'd like to add before I turn it back over to Chair Bauer is I just found out today Lucy Gordon, who actually filed the National Register nomination for this building back in 1986. Lucy's not doing so well, so maybe we could adjourn in her honor and send her our best thoughts and wishes. But anyway, thank you, Chair Bauer.
Thanks so much, Chair Reinhardt. Yes, I know Lucy and adore her, so I'll be sending her best wishes. Sad news. With that, we'll close this item and adjourn the meeting. And we have our next meeting, which was supposed to be on November 22nd, is canceled. And the next meeting scheduled is looking like December 13th for now. That adjourn, and good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.